Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast for tech executives. We provide strategies and tactics to help executives succeed and further their career goals. With interviews from industry experts, leaders, and innovators, this show will surely get you on the edge of your seat with thought-provoking advice on how to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge, a podcast that explores the latest trends, strategies, and insights in the technology leadership world. From emerging technologies to digital transformation and beyond, we will discuss the most important topics and ideas shaping the industry today. Join us to learn all of the juicy secrets of tech leaders, their biggest successes and failures on our quest for gaining that all-important technology edge. So are you ready? Let's get started. Our guest today is Dave Erickson. Dave has bootstrapped 12 startups and is currently CEO and co-founder of a digital development company and a content marketing company. He has experience in digital marketing and development. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Well, glad to be here.
So tell us about your company.
Well, Screenbox is focused on digital development, and by that pretty much includes web, mobile, backend, even just trying to figure out how to use digital technology to solve business problems. That's kind of the core of what Screenbox has been for the last 10 years. And we are industry agnostic. We don't care what industry the client is in. And we approach development a little bit differently, and that is with a lot of the business experiences that I've had. My first question to a client is usually, what's your business problem? So a client may come to me and say, I need to do my website, redo my website. And I'll say, okay, let's have a business conversation first. You're not just doing your website because you just woke up and decided you're going to redo your website. There's a reason, right? There's some business challenge you're trying to address. And it's much better to have a business conversation about that. And then we can figure out, how do we use technology to solve the business challenge, right?
Totally makes sense. So what are some of the typical challenges? Okay, like example, you gave an example of someone coming to you and saying, hey, I want to redo my website. And they obviously were inspired by something. What's typically something that makes somebody decide that they want to change out their website?
Well, it could be several different things. I've had clients who've come to me and said, literally, we did our website about 5 years ago. We haven't touched it, updated, or anything. And so we need to do that, because it's been 5 years, not because there's any real business reason, but just it's been 5 years and we haven't touched it. So we should update it. And then I usually have the conversation, well, what motivated this? Or was there something in the background? You had some problems, or maybe you'd like to get more business. You're trying to grow your business, or what's really that? And I find that by having that conversation, it's much better from a client service position, because that question is really about helping the client. Whereas a lot of typical agencies are like, oh, the client thinks they need a new website. Great, let's just give a proposal to build a new website. And they don't really care about what the real business challenge is, because as far as they're concerned, they already got someone saying, I want a website. So why go into this other stuff? Let's just give them a proposal for a website. And, I've had clients who've come to me and said, I need a new website. And we go look at their website. We're like, your website's fine, right? What's really your problem, right? And what are you really trying to address? Oh, I would like to do this. Well, no, your website doesn't have the ability to capture incoming leads and generate stuff from organic traffic. So we can change that, but that's very different than rebuilding your website, right? But I've also had clients come to me and say, I need to rebuild my website. And what they really needed to do is rebuild their entire back end, right?
Sure.
And use the website to automate processes, right? But they don't know that when they come to me. Right. They usually are thinking about some other issue. And once we kind of get into what are you really trying to do? What's your business challenge? Then that just opens up the conversation to provide a real solution versus what they think they need. Right?
Yeah, it's like when people come to you and they say, I need a mobile application. And then you ask them, well, why do you need a mobile application? What is it you're trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because I think that's the thing that people don't always grasp, is that I've had people say, oh, I need a whole new website because I'm not getting conversions. Well, you probably don't need a whole new website. There's probably something wrong with your landing page, copy or something.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to fix it without redoing your entire website.
Yeah.
So what you've bootstrapped 12 startups. What are some other types of companies that you've started?
Well, I had a publishing company in Europe for like 8 or 9 years. I've had a solar company. I started out in contract electronics manufacturing. I've had a branding and licensing company in the gaming industry. Ran that for, wow, almost 15 years. We developed a gaming esports brand, and I licensed that to large manufacturers in Asia. And I've had a lot of little startups that, some lasted 3 months and nothing happened, and others lasted a year, and then, okay, it's not going in a direction that means anything. If half of what you start fails, you're lucky, because that means that you actually learned something, right? Because you don't really learn as much from the successes as you do from the failures, right? And
Sure.
what the businesses that did succeed, they all succeeded on the backs of some failure that I had, right? Some lesson that was learned, and then I was able, okay, the next business, let's get it right. So for me, the process of starting businesses is really about, finding a business that can fail in a way that I learned something, or that succeeds because of something I had learned previously, right?
So what from those experiences, could you give me like 2 things you've learned from those experiences that have helped you with Screenbox?
People and the position of trying to help. So in starting a business, the key is really people. And there's 2 sides of people. There's the people who are working with you or working for you, and then there's the people you're working with. And understanding those people and understanding why they would like to work with you, and knowing who you are, that's kind of the key. In some of the businesses that I've had that didn't work, one of the major reasons was that some of the people in the business were not the right people, or they didn't treat me well, or I didn't treat them well, or they didn't treat the client well, the client didn't treat them well. And, in those situations, you really got to understand it. We approached that with Screenbox very differently, because we had that impression. We actually developed over the last 10 years a lot of personality testing and analysis. And we basically have like a 10 to 15 minute personality assessment. We don't do it just for our developers. We do it for our clients and our developers. And the biggest problem that we've had in development is the client may be like a marketing agency who needs, some work done for one of their clients, and the agency is all full of creative types, and that's what a good marketing agency needs to be full of. But those are not really the best type of people to be leading a development project, right? So if you have a bunch of developers who are very detailed oriented and very, operating procedure oriented, and they have their way of wanting to work in a certain way, and then you put them with a client who's all creative and not very organized and, loosey goosey, there's going to be a lot of conflict there, right? And a lot of it's going to be communication conflict or workflow conflict. So we found that if we, personality test and assess both sides, then we can kind of find the best people to work together, and it eliminates so many problems on the front end, right? And we have clients, we have team extension, where basically they're coming to us and say, we really need a developer to work on a project for full time, and we're going to manage them, right? And they're amazed that the developer that we find them just starts and is productive from day one, right? And a lot of that is because we are analyzing the personalities, and, it's a little bit more expensive on our side, because, we're not just finding the first developer who's available and giving it to the client. We may have to go through 3 or 4 developers till we find a personality match that we know is really going to work well together. right? And it seems like a lot of effort. It seems like a lot of issues, but I've just learned in business that the right people working with the right people make success, right? And
Right.
it really is very important, particularly in a service business, that you're finding good people, that you're working with good people, and you take that extra effort to understand both sides, right?
Yeah, I think your people answer is perfect to me because I'm a business coach, and one of the things they look for is patterns. And you find that if this problem exists, this pattern probably exists. And a lot of times it's, there's too many technical people and not enough creative people, or there's too many creative people and not enough technical people. But by knowing those patterns, you can, like you said, you can plug the right developer in with the right client. I mean, it's if you take, because I had a development company for years, and I followed a similar approach to you. And I feel like you hear in entrepreneurship, you got to find the client that wants to work with you and that you want to work with. All right. Now take that into a bigger development business picture. You're working with a lot of different types of people, but it's how you hook those people up with their resources that's going to make you successful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean,
And you got to be, you don't necessarily get to choose the clients in a sense,
right.
because, you might work with one person to land the client. Then you got the client, you're working with somebody else to actually do the work, right? So there is a flexibility that's needed in the sense that you don't always know who the clients are. You don't always know who the personalities are. And you may not get to see the real person until you've worked with them for a couple of months. And then the pressures and the stresses start falling into deadlines. And then you get to see who the real person is, right? And that's where kind of the second kind of rule is, or not rule, but observation I've had in business is, and that is treat everyone with respect, right? Go the extra mile to kind of be respectful, because you don't know what's happening on the other side, right? They may have, a wife who is sick and that's why they're always stressed out, or they may be, on the verge of bankruptcy and they're just trying to keep the business together, or their client is, treating them in an awful way. And, you got to really treat people with respect, not just your people, but the clients. And you got to kind of let things that are said that aren't necessarily kind or nice go through you. Don't take it personally, and then try to build a relationship in a positive way where you can kind of get an understanding of why something was said or why they're approaching you this way. And then you work with that. And I've always been able to come back to a client who either mistreated me or mistreated our developers or whatever, and work with them and say, look, this was not positive. And usually it's some external issue that they just hung on to, and they didn't realize that they were acting the way they were acting, or that what they said was meaning what it meant. And I've been able to turn around almost all those relationships into a positive relationship. And that's one of the things I think is really important in business, especially nowadays, that treating people with respect and trying to understand where they're coming from, it just makes for positive business, right? And I hate doing business where it's stressful and I don't like the other person, right? And usually that comes from misunderstanding, right? And so making that effort to understand the other person and where they're coming from, it can turn business around and make it really positive. And like I said, I love getting up and feeling good about everyone I work with. And that's life's too short to be suffering, right?
well, yeah, and like it's something I tell my wife all the time because she works with a lot of different companies, and she'll say, "I'm really surprised, so and so is super rude today." And I say, "Well, you've got to stop and think about, like, what did they go through? I mean, and it's not just professionally, but what are they going through personally at the moment? Because generally speaking, if someone's successful, and then you could probably realize they're not super rude people, because if they were, they probably wouldn't be successful. That's not always the case. There's plenty of successful people who are rude, but for the most part, you find that to be the case. And if all of a sudden someone's being rude to you, you kind of have to wonder, like, well, what the heck is going on in their life? And so I like that you focus on that. I think I think having the people touch is something that is missing from a lot of businesses. And I know tech leaders specifically have that problem because they tend to be more analytical, less capable of carrying on a good conversation. I mean, I've had clients tell me, "Oh, you're the most user-friendly technologist ever." I love that phrase, user-friendly technologist, because it means they understand what the heck I'm saying to them. That's really what it means.
Yeah.
And it gets me a lot of business, and I get a customer and I keep a customer because of that. But I think one of the things I strive with my clients to do is teach them that, like, okay, one of the number one pain points of every CTO is upper management who doesn't understand technology. And so when you say, "Hey, I got to spend $50,000 doing X," they say, "What?" And because they don't understand technology, and you have to, but it's not their fault. As the tech leader, you've got to inform them as you're going along about what are the problems. Here's how we're going to solve the problem. It's going to cost this much money. Here's why it's going to cost this much money. I mean, what if you need a very, very specific type of resource? I know I have a lady that she does a very specific thing with NetSuite. And as a result, she gets like $200 an hour.
Yeah.
Other people can't charge that, but she can. And when a client comes to you and they're like, "Can we do this?" Yeah, it's going to be like $200 an hour. They're like, "Why?" Well, you explain to them why, they tend to get it, you know?
Yeah.
So how long has Screenbox been around?
This is our 10th year.
10th year. And what was the impetus? Like, what started you down this path?
Well, I have another company called Rainmaker, which is more content marketing, digital marketing. I've actually had that since 2000, so it's been 22 years or whatever. And I was starting to get clients who were having me do a lot of social media work and content writing, and they were coming to me with web projects and digital development. "Hey, we need this." And if I referred them to some agencies, I had a couple where they didn't like the agency. It kind of didn't feel good to me that I referred them to somebody who turned out not to be very good.
Sure.
And then I started trying to work with some developers, but just finding a developer on Upwork or whatever and working for them, people think it's really simple and easy. It isn't. So I had 3 other people that I was working with, and we kind of all were having the same problem, right? About working with it. And we said, "Look, if we had a development agency, this is how we would want it to be. This is our version of what a development agency would be like." And so we said, "Well, how do we make that?" And that's how we started Screenbox.
Awesome.
We were focusing more on how do we build an agency that is very flexible, that can handle a wide range and type of work. We didn't want to have a building full of people. We wanted to do something virtual. So we've been virtual and remote since the beginning, which when the pandemic came actually put us in a really interesting position because we have all this experience working with people remotely, right? And keeping them motivated and keeping them organized. And, so I actually had clients coming to me saying, "Well, how do you do it?" Right? And I had some other agencies coming to me saying, "I know you guys are all remote because they've used our developers for their agency. How do you guys do it?" And so we actually did a whole bunch of training, and we actually earned some decent money just teaching people this is how to do remote work with developers and how to have a remote team spread over 3 or 4 time zones and that type of stuff. So, that's kind of how we started Screenbox. It all worked out well in that sense.
That's funny because I had the exact experience when the pandemic hit. I had a lot of, I have about 12 remote development teams that I use, and I had clients contacting me saying, we were never in favor of remote work, so we never did the legwork. How do you do it? I'll pay you if you teach me, how do you do it? In some cases, it required like changes to their firewall and things because they had it totally locked down. But for the most part, it was just a methodology, like I could tell you a short little story. I worked with a group of guys who were good friends, and they were entrepreneurs, and they started a business. And then one of them broke off and started a similar business. And we were both using the same development team. And I was getting tons of work out of these people. He wasn't getting work done. He'd given him an assignment to take a week to get it done. So my CEO said, "Can you go over there and see what the heck they're doing?" Well, it was a simple fix. That what they were doing was, it was 5 o'clock. It was time to go home. They'd whip off an email to the team, and then they'd leave. And then, of course, the next day there'd be 10 questions and they couldn't start the work. And then they'd answer the questions. And the next day there'd be 5 more questions. And I said, it's a simple fix. Have a meeting with them each day, have a standout, be like, here's the new assignments. Here's what you're going to do. Got any questions? Great. Now you can start working. And that's all I was doing. But that's the thing. People don't know how to do things. And they think, like you said, I love your comment about finding a developer on Upwork. I've heard that so many times. Like, oh, I'll just go to Upwork and find somebody. Good luck with that. I mean, I even made money.
Oh, yeah.
I made money years ago managing offshore teams for people who weren't getting the work done because they just don't know how. But when you know how, it's not that difficult. But finding somebody on Upwork can be, I mean, I've had them lie and tell me they're in France when they're in Africa and, you know, stuff like that. And you wonder sometimes, like, well, if you lied about that, what else are you going to lie about?
But I mean, Upwork, Fiverr, all those networks, they have some advantages, but they have real disadvantages, and those disadvantages are really starting to come out now, not just for the people hiring developers or people on Upwork, but for the actual developers, right? I have a bunch of developers in the last year who've come to me and said, I was on Upwork and I was making good money, but you know, I got stiffed by a bunch of clients, and they go to Upwork and it's just impossible to get your money, and on and on and on. So they're really disappointed in that. And so they're like, I want to work now again for a development agency. I understand why you guys get paid the way you do and all that. And I've had clients who've had the same, you know, they hire some developers on Upwork and it just falls apart and they don't know why. And so they're like, I want to come to an agency. At least I know you guys will hold it together and do the, you know, finish the project. So, you know, in some ways it's a boon to development agencies because of how poorly they operate. But some people do really well on Upwork, you know, and some developers find good clients on Upwork and that type of stuff. So, you know, it's good and bad. And, you know, it depends on what your level of risk is, right?
Yeah, it's just another microcosm of society. I mean, you're going to find good, you're going to find bad. I actually had an experience when I first started back about 7 years ago. I first started my corporation. I had this gentleman working on a project, and thankfully I kind of sensed that I couldn't really trust him with certain information. And so I had him on like a virtual machine that was cloned, a cloned environment to what the customer was using. And he had a copy of their database in there, and everything that needed to be encrypted was encrypted. And then one day he gave us a price on something. He did it. And then he said, but I'm not giving you the code unless you pay me double. And so, you know, I'm like, nah, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get double. He started deleting things from the database, which kind of cracked me up because, dude, you're deleting stuff from a virtual machine. Go for it. But he really thought that he had us over a barrel, and he could have if I hadn't been careful and hadn't had that gut feeling. So you're right. Like, you're going to meet the best people and the worst people there. So, like, what is your process for finding developers? What do you do?
Well, several things. I mean, we have a network of about 150 developers at this point. And they're people that we have worked with or have come to us and we have met through other developers that have worked with us. Everything's kind of relationship pulled. I mean, we're not sitting out there throwing ads up on the various networks and trying to pull developers in. It's usually all by personal reference. Then once when we get somebody into the network, we do a lot of testing. We have homework challenges to find out their tech skills. The personality assessments really let us know a lot about who these people are. And we've weeded out developers who we could just say, okay, these guys are obviously not very firm, or their personalities are such that they just don't fit our network. Right?
Sure.
And that takes care of a lot of it because they're all tend to be known people. And they're coming to our network from people that we trust and have worked with over time, right? And we have developers. We basically mostly work with developers in Europe, Eastern Europe, but Eastern Europe now, most of the developers have left Eastern Europe and they just live in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of our Hungarian developers are in Spain or in, you know,
Yeah,
Germany.
for whatever reason, they moved to different places.
Right.
I mean,
and
the Eastern European developers, say 8 years ago, were top notch. Like,
yeah, they are, and even there's differences in the regions, the education systems and the cultures. make them so that they're different. We like multinational teams because you get a variety of developers. So if we have to put together, like for a project, somebody wants a multi-platform mobile and web thing, we'll do something in React and React Native, right? Or Flutter, right? And we're going to need 3 or 4 developers. We'll usually have like one developer in South America if it's a West Coast client, because they can have calls and meetings, and they're usually kind of the point developer. And then we'll have, a developer who's in Hungary or somewhere, and maybe Poland, and they approach problems differently. Hungarian developers are very good at problem solving. Polish developers are very good at the technical nuts and bolts, and having a team that you kind of have those on them, you can approach a lot of different solutions and problems. And that makes working in these kind of time zones better, because the South American developer will be having a lot of calls with the client, and then in his evening he'll sit there and work with the European developers and do the transfer of information. And then while everyone's sleeping, the European developers will do the work and coding, and then the next day they're up and something actually happened, right? And so you don't get a lot of the stalls and a lot of that. So that's usually how we work with it. And the multinational teams are really good. We don't really work with anybody in Asia. The time zones don't work out very well, and culturally it's very hard to find like an Indian developer that just works out well. We've had a couple, and we have them in our network, but it's not the majority. And we get a lot of clients who are coming from Indian development companies, and it's just like, I've spent $200,000 and my project doesn't work, and it's a mess, and I can't figure it out, and they're hard to work with, and blah, blah, blah. I can't tell you how many clients we've gotten where we've had to clean that up, right?
Isn't it interesting that people from different parts of the world present different positives and negatives to the overall equation? What do you think is the biggest struggle you've had with Screenbox?
Well, it's gone through different phases. Probably one of the biggest struggles we had was we had a partner that just created a lot of chaos in the business. And that constant flow of chaos just really created a lot of problems. We ended up having to move on. But emotionally, I'm very loyal to partners, and when you start a business with somebody, it's more like a family kind of thing, and that's just what it is. So it's really hard to have a situation like that. But that was one of the harder things to do. And the mechanical side of it sometimes will get a little bit overwhelming. We've had different phases. Sometimes there was accounting issues where it was like, how do we manage the accounting? This client wants something really special, and it just doesn't fit the accounting structure that we have. So how do we deal with that? Now we've got a lot of experience in that, and our accounting is much more flexible and easier to work with. And then, early on it was, well, how do we deal with the time zone issues? And until we figured that out, then that was an issue. And now we have, 10 years of experience with that is not an issue at all. So during the business, there's different phases, which are part of this learning process, right?
And that right there, the learning aspect is another thing that I think it's why people have problems working with Indian developers or offshore developers, is they're not learning from their past mistakes on how to make this smoother the next time around, and they just give up. That's really a big issue. So what is, if you can say, what has been like your favorite project that you've worked on?
Well, I've had a couple, but we have a music company that we're working with. And this is one of those where they came to us and said, we need to update our website. And I literally had, I would say, about a month and a half of conversations with the business owner before we even got into the project. And it was just, what do you really need? Like, what are you trying to do? What are the business challenges that you have? And I would start having these business conversations. He had all kinds of issues. He didn't have control of his domain hosting or his web hosting. a previous developer had it, and so he had to go through a bunch of legal stuff to get control of his website and all that. So I was advising him on a business level. I never even got paid for it. It's just, let's just build a relationship. I need to help you out. You're really in trouble. I'm just going to help you out. Once the dust is settled and you're in a better position, then let's have a conversation about what we can do for you. And so that's what we did. And I helped him on several levels to gain control of his website, to gain control of his business. And then we started having conversations. Okay, how do you want to approach this? And I realized in talking to him about his business challenges that he's like, he had a whole bunch of people on the back end doing a lot of manual stuff that really could be automated. And his back end was working on a old technology flat file database. And so once he kind of understood the potential, we then brought in a UX team who really started discussing with every stakeholder in his business. He introduced us to his customers, his licensees, his back-end people. We probably spent 4 months just doing UX work, trying to understand what he wants to grow his business and what are the tools that we can bring to allow him to do that and reduce the amount of effort he needs to run his business. And so that was actually the project's first 4 months, was just UX work. And once that was done, we then were able to put together a plan. And we said, look, you were thinking of $100,000 website project, and really it's a $300,000 back-end website business project. His cash flow is such that he can only afford so much a month. And so what we did is we said, okay, if it takes us 1.5 years to do this project, we'll do it. And we put together a team that can burn at that rate, right? So everybody was part-time. There was a lot of flexibility in it. And yes, we could have had a full-time team and just whipped this thing out in 4 months, but he didn't have the cash flow to pay for that.
Yeah.
Right. So we just managed it that way. And after 1.5 years of it, he now has a product that's going to revolutionize his business, and he's absolutely excited about it. And he has something that's putting him a significant leap ahead of all of his competitors. And so for us, that's like a great feeling project. And they were such nice people to work with, really stellar people. And the team was great for them, and everybody just had a lot of respect for each other. And it was just one of those projects that went well. It had its issues, right? Like any technology product, you run into something that you didn't expect, and it was supposed to be easy and it turned out to be hard. But like I said, everybody treated each other very well, and there was lots of understanding, and they were in from the very beginning on a very deep level. Everybody in their company knew exactly what we were doing and what they were trying to do. And it just made for a really great project.
Oh, that's a great story. I mean, I like stories where you can help someone else out. And you did it in a way that it didn't like risk your business, didn't risk their business. And I mean, I'm sure in a sense, you probably have a customer for life at this point with something like that. But this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you being here, but we're kind of running out of time. So why don't you let people know how they can get in touch with you if they'd like to reach you, et cetera.
Yeah, probably the easiest way is just to go to our website, screamingbox.com, and there's a contact us form on it. I'm in the process of redoing our website, but as you know, any website development company, the last thing they're going to do is build their own website. Yeah, you can contact us through there. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Dave Erickson 1. And we have our podcast as well, podcast.screenbox.com. And you can contact us through any of those ways.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure these get into the show notes and into the video description. And again, thanks for your time. And everybody, thanks for tuning in to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We hope that you've had a great time with us, learning everything you need to know to stay ahead of the technology curve. Remember, be curious, be updated on all the latest trends, and show them who's boss. Until next time, we'll be back with plenty more techie tips and tricks so you can stay on top of your game. See you then.